Now, here we go. This time, we got something else to read and think about, and I intend to do the Ivan's Rebellion. It's just about what you can cover in one lecture, and it's very interesting and very important and existentialist. It reveals a lot about Dostoevsky's philosophy and a lot about Ivan all at the same time. Just to remember where we are, Ivan is the one who wants to be perfect, to get rid of the base, earthy, dark, sensual Karamazov side of himself and become a refined, abstract, pure person who is self-sufficient and observer, not involved, observer, eyewitness of what's going on. It comes out, too, in lots of little ways, how he doesn't want to get involved with anybody. On 223, he's starting to tell Alyosha his intimate life sort of stance, and he tells him something which only Ivan would think at the top of 223. He says, I want to get to know you once and for all, and I want you to know me, and then we will say goodbye. I believe it's always best to get to know people just before leaving them. That is, not to get involved, not to get hurt, not to get... that is, you may know people like that who just at the end of vacation or just at the end of the school year, you'll be able to get close to them only because they know that they're going to go away and so are in some sense safe. So Ivan wants to tell Alyosha everything as long as they don't get involved, and he wants to tell him this sort of existentialist thing. He wants to tell him, the middle of 228, I'm trying to explain as quickly as possible my essential nature, that is, what manner of man I am, what I believe in, and for what I hope. That's it, isn't it? And he wants to tell Alyosha his existentialist stance, which he succeeds very well in doing in the course of the following discussion. And it's not taught, it isn't really even telling him what he believes. It's something deeper than that. It's telling him how he relates to the world, how he lives, that he wants to explain. And so, and he says that, he starts to explain that, on page 223. And this long speech I have to read, because it's complicated what Ivan's relation is. It isn't just that he's an observer. It's well, you'll see when I read it, a little below the middle of 223. Do you know, I've been sitting here thinking to myself that if I didn't believe in life, if I lost faith in the woman I love, that's Katerina, lost faith in the order of things, or convinced, in fact, that everything is a disorderly, damnable, and perhaps devil-ridden chaos, which in a way he does believe. If I were struck by every horror of man's disillusionment, still I would want to live. That is, he's involved, he's enough involved in life that he can't just get out of it. Having once tasted of the cup, I would not turn away from it. The cup is the cup of life. He's talking in all these metaphors. I would not turn away from it till I had drained it. That is, he wants to get everything he can out of life before he turns away from it, and he means commit suicide, it turns out, at 30. At 30, though, I shall be sure to leave the cup, even if I've not emptied it, and turn away, where I do not know, although he certainly sort of knows that he's got to, and he wants to kill himself. But till I am 30, I know that my youth will triumph over everything, every disillusionment, every disgust with life. I've asked myself many times whether there is in the world any despair that could overcome this frantic thirst for life. See, that's the Karamazov in him he can't get rid of. And I've come to the conclusion that there isn't, that is till I'm 30, and then he thinks he will, because this Karamazov sensuality and search for life and love of, as he says at the top of 224, the sticky little leaves in the spring and so forth, the blue sky, all this attractive side of the world that attracts Ivan and makes him attractive, he can't get over it, but he wants to, and when he does at 30, then he'll get out of the world somehow. And And he seems to love people. It's sort of hard to get a fix on that. He seems to be loving Katerina, and when he's talking to her, it looks like he has this sensual, earthy side. But he also says at one point he's never understood loving his neighbors, and Fyodor says that Ivan never loved anyone. I think that's sort of true, and he certainly has no unconditioned commitment to anyone but himself, because if he found himself really getting involved with someone so that they were the important thing in his life, gave his life meaning, he would be in terrible shape. He wants to be autonomous. He wants to be a self-made and independent person. So I think he loves people as much as you can love people and still be a completely safe, independent person. And that's so much for that. He considers then, in a funny way, his involvement in the world, his sensual side, his Karamazov life, as not essential and somehow bad. And it's not essential because he can get rid of it. He may have to kill himself to get rid of it, but he's not going to let it determine what he does, at least not as soon as he can get free of it at 30. Now that's not altogether crucial. What's crucial is what follows. That is, what he explains to Alyosha is his basic stance on the world. Why he has to get out of it when he's 30, and why, and that given his sort of honorable, moral, pure attitude, it's just impossible for him to stay around in this world. Before I can explain that, before he can explain that to Alyosha, he's got to make a distinction, which is a very existentialist Pascalian distinction. He's not going to discuss whether God exists or not. He says we're just not capable with our finite, everyday human minds to grasp whether God exists or not. Pascal starts this, like so many other important existentialist things. Pascal has this wonderful idea in the Pensées. He doesn't say you can't prove the existence of God. He says you can prove the existence of God and you can prove the non-existence of God, which is just a very interesting and true philosophical thing to say. Philosophers have come up with all sorts of interesting proofs of the existence of God and all sorts of interesting proofs of the non-existence. And what Pascal thinks is that just shows the limits of human reason. And that's exactly what Ivan thinks. He says at the bottom of 228, about a third of the page up, I have a Euclidean earthly mind, and so how can I solve problems which are not of the world? And I advise you never to think about it either, Alyosha, especially about God, whether he exists or not. And Alyosha never does. All such questions are utterly inappropriate for a mind created with an idea of only 3 dimensions. And so I accept God. Now, he doesn't really care. I mean, that's just, for the sake of the argument, in effect. For the sake of the argument, I accept God. I'm glad to. And what's more, I accept his wisdom, his purpose, which is completely beyond our knowledge. But he's going to make a different sort of argument, he says. And that's the argument that he's about to give Gabrielle. Gabrielle's the name of my daughter. I don't know how she got into my head today. I haven't even talked to her on the phone or anything for a few days. But anyway, if I keep saying Gabrielle, I always mean Ivan. What the connection is beyond me. Now we have to go into his argument, which is his defense of a certain philosophical position, but not just a philosophical position, but a certain way of life that he wants to defend. And that's what he starts talking about on 229 at the top. Yet, would you believe it, in the final result, I don't accept this world of God's. Although I know it exists, I don't accept it at all. It's not that I don't accept God, you must understand. It's the world created by him I don't and cannot accept. And that's that's a kind of existentialist point. It doesn't really matter whether the supreme being exists. Remember, Kierkegaard got rid of the supreme being already, and and yet he thought faith was very important. It's a question of faith is about how you live in the world, and how involved you will be in the world, and in what way you will be involved in the world. And Ivan has a very strong view that he does not accept the usual Christian way of being in the world. That's what he rejects. And now we're going to find out what he means. He's going to prove that any decent person is obliged to leave the world as soon as possible, as soon as they get over this young, sensual love of everything, which he sort of has. And the question is, for Ivan, why should you do that? Well, he's going to tell us why. And he has a rather complicated argument, not terribly. And he's going to tell us, he's going to argue, he's going to give evidence that the world is such a corrupt and evil place that no moral person could accept living in it. That's his rebellion. That's his rejection of the world. And you should be asking yourself, because Dostoevsky wants you to take this book seriously and to take the arguments in the book seriously. You have to ask yourself, as you hear this argument right now, and as you read it, are you convinced? Are you going to commit suicide at the age of 30? And if not, where's the flaw in his argument? It's pretty convincing. It even convinces Alyosha, as you'll see. And that's very interesting. Okay, and so here we go. He says he's been collecting a dossier of child abuse, in effect, atrocities committed against children. And that's going to be the sort of basis of his case against the world. On 232, at the middle of the page roughly, he says, I like to collect certain facts, and would you believe, I even copy anecdotes of a certain sort from newspapers and books. I've got a fine collection. I think fine is not quite the right translation, though. I can't explain why. But you just take my word for it. He should be saying, I've got a nice collection. Now, what the difference is between a fine and a nice is subtle, all right. But you'll see that it fits. And next time he talks about this, he does say nice. Fine makes it sound too much like it's fine art. That's not what he's got. So let's go on. And at first he has to get rid of two objections to his argument. That there is all this evil because everybody deserves it. They've done bad things and now they're being punished. And the second is that even though this world is full of bad things, even for people who don't deserve it, and good things for people who should be being punished, that's going to be made up for in the afterlife. That is, the bad people are ultimately going to get punished for eternity, and the good people are going to get rewarded for eternity, so this little sort of wobble in the system doesn't matter. It's all going to be fixed in the end. So his answer to that, as you should remember, is, well, children are innocent. You can't say of children that they've done something wrong, and that's why there can be child abuse and they can be tortured and so forth. They don't know right and wrong until they're 7, turns out to be the view that Dostoevsky accepts from the Russian Orthodox Church. That isn't that children don't do bad and nasty things before they're 7, but they don't really know that they're bad and nasty things. They don't understand good and evil. Augustine is interesting about this. Augustine wants to argue both the children are innocent and that there is some kind of original sinfulness. And he has this example of how children are sinful from the start because he says a sibling who has already had all the milk that he or she can take from the mother will be jealous and upset when the other sibling gets the breast and the milk. And that kind of jealousy and upsetness is sin all the way back, Augustine says. And that's probably okay. And Dostoevsky would just say, yes, but that's not the same as doing something wrong that you know is wrong. And children don't do that. Children are basically sweet and attractive. That's a bit of an exaggeration for Ivan. How old is Kolya? Does anybody remember? Who is not at all sweet and attractive. He's over 7, though. I think Kolya's about 12. Keep your eyes open. Kolya's a test child later in the book. It plays a big role. But it isn't Kolya, it's Ilusha. Yeah, keep your eyes open for Ilusha. He's younger, and he's the test child. And see if he's nice and gentle and loving as Ivan thinks. I think Ivan is supposed to be sort of not knowing anything about children up close, making this special, nice picture of children, for reasons that will become obvious in a minute. So they're supposed to be sweet and lovable, and yet they're made to suffer. This is on 231. At about 8 lines down. But in the first place, children can be loved even at close quarters, even when they're dirty, even when they're ugly. He doesn't really know. The second reason why I would speak of grown-up people is that besides being disgusting and unworthy of love, they have a compensation. They've eaten the fruit and know good and evil. They've become like gods. What he's saying is, if older people are hurt and tortured and suffer, it's probably because, or it must be because, they've done something wrong. But children suffer, and they haven't or done anything wrong in the sense that they're innocent. These are younger than 7s. On 235, he tells this story. He tells lots of stories about people who torture children, kill children in front of the eyes of their mother, beat up their own children, whip them, and so forth. And then at the bottom of 234, having told a lot of horror stories already, he says, but I've still better things about children. Those are those nice things. A great deal about Russian children, Alyosha. There was a little girl of 5 who was hated by her father and mother, worthy and respectable people, and so forth, and they torture her in some way. I forget how. It doesn't matter. But what matters at the end of that paragraph, he says, in every man, of course, a demon lies hidden, the demon of rage, the demon of lustful heat at the screams of the tortured victim. We'll come back to that in a while. But right now, there's evil in the world, and it's people hurting innocent children. And Ivan thinks that the answer that will get fixed in another world isn't any solution, which is interesting. One, it doesn't help to punish the abusers. It just adds more suffering, but that's not going to help the ones who were suffering. And what about them? Well, it doesn't help to reward the children, since they've already suffered. This is this kind of Kierkegaardian point that it's not going to help them while they're being tortured in various ways to say, well, when I get back and get into paradise, this is all going to look okay to me. It isn't okay when you're in it and you can't see it from the point of view of the future. So it doesn't help anybody that even if there were a God and even if in afterlife everything was ironed out, it wouldn't justify the suffering that children go through. So this is when he says on 238, there's a higher harmony wouldn't help. And that's about the middle of the page. Let's see. Yeah, the middle of the page. I renounce the higher harmony altogether. It's not worth the tears of that one tortured child who beat itself on the breast with its little fist and prayed in its stinking outhouse with tears to the dear God, and so forth. He says further down at the bottom, I don't want harmony from love of humanity. I don't want it. I would rather be left with this unavenged suffering. I would rather remain with my unavenged suffering and unsatisfied indignation, even if I were wrong. Besides, too high a price is asked for harmony. It's beyond our means to pay it. Now, that's the argument. That's why you have to do something. And what you have to do is the crucial thing. Next sentence is the crucial sentence in the whole argument. So, what do you do once you've got a dossier that proves that the world is a bad place where innocent children are tortured and nobody can make up for it. He says, and so I give back my entrance ticket, and if I am an honest man, I give it back as soon as possible, in his case at 30, and that's why I think it's suicide at 30 for him. And that I am doing. It's not God that I don't accept Alyosha, only I most respectfully return the ticket to him. That's rebellion, murmured Alyosha, looking down. Rebellion, I'm sorry if you call it that, said Ivan earnestly, but one can't live in rebellion, and I want to live, which is odd, but I guess that's because he's not yet 30. So now the question is, are we convinced of that argument? Well, did Ivan make his case? The test might well be, and Socrates started this, if you're having a kind of philosophical argument with somebody, you win the argument if you convince them. And that's the test of the argument. I mean, if you convince the person who doesn't want to believe it by giving them arguments that by rationality force them to believe it, then it looks like you got a good argument. And so the interesting question is, did he convince Alyosha, who certainly doesn't want to believe it? And the answer is, yes, he did. You want to say something? No, I see. Sorry, I thought it was you. 239. So at the top, Ivan says, tell me yourself, I challenge you, imagine. Imagine you are creating the fabric of human existence with the object of making man happy in the end and giving them peace. Imagine that you are doing this, but that it's essential and inevitable to torture to death only one tiny creature, that child beating its breast with its fist, for instance, in order to found that Oedipus on its unavenged tears. Did you consent to be the architect on those conditions? Tell the truth. No, I wouldn't consent, said Alyosha softly. So Alyosha admits he wouldn't agree to create this world. And that means Ivan has convinced Alyosha, and we're supposed to be convinced, I think, I'm convinced, that the way that the world is unacceptable to any moral person. Now comes, and therefore we should give back the ticket? There must be something wrong somewhere. What is it? Has anybody sort of figured out why Ivan has got it wrong? What's the mistake or the flaw? Yeah. In a certain way, yes. Say more. Okay, well, I think it's simpler in a way and more direct than that, and more surprising than that. The answer to Ivan, yeah. The world would be free of moral people, yes, but Ivan would say that's fine. I mean, that's better than a world in which these moral people have to subscribe to this bad stuff. Yeah. Well, that's, I see. I don't think it's a logical fallacy, but you're on a very important track. I mean, if he really cares about the suffering, giving back the ticket doesn't seem to be the right response. Hold on to that. You jumped ahead. I mean, in a way, that's Zosima's answer to him. But there's a deeper, more interesting, really, I think, flaw in what he's up to. Yeah. Okay, you're on the track I'm on. I think that's very important and interesting. That in a certain way, you can't give back your ticket. What all that means is part of what's fascinating about this book and this chapter, because the whole answer to this thing is not just in this chapter, but all over the place. But the picture that Ivan's got is that your relation to the world is a spectator. It's like being in a play. And if you think the play is vulgar or racist or just stupid or whatever, you can just give back your ticket and leave. Or it's like you're being wooed by some fraternity and sorority and you discover that they're prejudiced or in some way. And then you just don't join. But is your relation to the world like that? That your original position is, so to speak, standing outside it, and then your next question is, shall I join it? And the answer is no. And so what's wrong with his argument? Well, what's wrong with it is, because that's not part of his argument, this position from which he's making the argument. That I want to say, in a kind of slogan, what's wrong with his philosophical argument is that it's a philosophical argument. It's an argument from a detached spectator point of view. He's judging the world as if he were a kind of pure, rational observer of it, which is what philosophers do. Dostoevsky thinks, and Plato does, and lots of philosophers do. And so the answer to him would be something like, that's not how you are in the world as a spectator with a ticket you can give back. You're always already involved in the world, what she was saying, but you have to spell it out. You can't just say you're always already involved in the world because once you're born, you're there. You've got to make an argument that Ivan is not in a position to accept or reject it because he's not a pure, innocent bystander. He's not, what was the name of his job when he was writing for the newspaper? That's right. He's not an eyewitness. And how would you argue that? Well, the interesting thing is, Dostoevsky, I think, has a three-part argument which shows that he's completely involved and guilty of the suffering in the world and not an innocent bystander. And that's really what's fascinating, because that's going to tear down not the argument, but the position, the philosophical position from which he's making the argument, which is a neat existentialist move on the part of Dostoevsky. And he does it quite on purpose. Okay, so let's start. For one thing, what about his motivation? Is his motivation for getting so upset about these children just an abstract, theoretical observation? And this isn't a necessary part of the argument, I don't think, but Dostoevsky sets it up in an interesting way. I'll read you something and then see if you can see what's going on. When he's talking about the children back on 231, if they suffer, the middle of 231, if they too suffer horribly on earth, they must suffer for their father's sins. They must be punished for their fathers who have eaten the apple. But that reasoning is of the other world and is incomprehensible for the heart of man here on earth. The innocent must not suffer for another's sin, and especially such innocents, namely the children. What's special about that? Why is Ivan motivated by that kind of argument? Why is he especially upset that the children are suffering for their father's sins? Is that something he just arrives at from nowhere? Yeah. You're ahead of the story, way ahead. But that's going to be Alyosha's fallback position where you are. Yeah. Maybe. What do you think? Remember the plot? Did he suffer for his father's sins? He felt terrible being given away as a kind of orphan, having abandoned by his father, humiliated by his father. Yes, he suffered for his father's sins. He thinks, yeah. Well, I think suffering is fine, and I think Dostoevsky is playing this game. When Dostoevsky's doing anything, I've told you this, he gives you a hint that what's going on. At the end of that paragraph, he says suddenly, at the very end, you don't know why I'm telling you all this, Alyosha. My head aches and I'm sad. So, I mean, he's really telling, he's really feeling sorry for himself and how he was treated by his father, but he doesn't really understand that very well himself, but he's getting all upset about it. But that's only the motivation. That's not the important part. The important part is, in what sense is Ivan part of the problem? That is, part of the suffering that he is pretending or believing that he has nothing to do with. This is really where it gets remarkable. And remember now that in Christianity you're responsible for your desires. We talked about that, didn't we, already once, that Jesus made this move in which people became responsible for their desires? Maybe not. You're all looking puzzled. You're saying, yes, we did, and she's saying, no, we didn't. Okay. Does this sound familiar when Jesus says on the Sermon on the Mount that you commit adultery, he commits adultery, you lusts after a woman in his heart? Did I talk about that? Yeah, it's making this big move. That's what I thought I talked about, in which instead of what actions you perform, it's what impulses you have, what desires you have that define you, and you're judged on the basis of your desires. So now we want to know, well, what desires does Ivan have? And this will come as a big surprise, I think, to you. It certainly did to me, and it took me years to see it. Dostoevsky hides it so well. But now, where are we? Let's see. So Ivan, on 234, he's talking about people being whipped, getting themselves excited up to sensuality. It's the quote on 235 which is important. Do you see anything strange about the claim? In every man, of course, a demon lies hidden. The demon of rage, the demon of lustful heat at the screams of the tortured victim. Do you subscribe to that? I mean, I feel, maybe there's something wrong with me, I don't feel any demon in me. I just don't get a big kick out of screams of tortured victims. I don't even like to go to movies in which people get hurt and tortured. But he's claiming that it's obvious to him. Of course, everybody gets turned on by torture and loves the screams of tortured victims, the lustful heat at those screams. What does this show about Ivan? Maybe he's a sadist. I mean, he seems to know firsthand that people are turned on by torture and suffering. Well, if that's all I had to go on, you would be right to say that this is too clever by half. You've got some little speech in which he says he knows that everybody does this, but it's certainly not an argument for claiming that he's sadistic. So, Dostoevsky, takes a long time for Dostoevsky to tell you practically in so many words, and you have to jump ahead to 552. I spent an hour this morning trying to find this quote. Finally, thanks to Amazon and search the text, and remembering the crucial word in it, I found it. I knew it was in here somewhere. So here you go. This is really quite amazing. Lisa is certainly sadistic. She has this wonderful dream of a child. I'll start in the middle of 552. There's a book wherein I read about a trial of a man who took a 4-year-old child and cut off the fingers from both hands and crucified him on the wall, hammered nails into him and crucified him. And afterwards, when he was tried, he said that the child died quickly within 4 hours. That was quickly. He said the child moaned, kept on moaning, and he stood admiring it. That's nice. See, that's why I want nice instead of fine. You'll see, you wouldn't say that's fine. But if you're a sadist and somebody's done something really terrific, you'd say that's nice. And Alyosha says, nice. And then he looks at her, and she goes on at the bottom there. I cried all night. I kept thinking of how the little thing cried and moaned. A child of 4 understands, And all the while the thought of the pineapple jam haunted me. Oh, she has these visions that while she's watching the crucified child, she's enjoying pineapple jam. In the morning, I wrote a letter to a certain person, begging him to come and see me. He came, and I told him all about the child and the pineapple jam, all about it, all, and he said it was nice. Then he got up and went away. Who was it? It was Ivan. It was Ivan. Alyosha knows it was Ivan. And she says, did he despise me? Did he despise me? And Alyosha, they says, did you send for that person? Yes, I did. Did you send him a letter? And so forth. And Alyosha says that person behaved honorably and so forth. What she really wants to do is be, I don't know, raped really by Ivan, only it's only in dots that she says it. I forget where. She thinks that she wants to be involved with somebody who tortures her. And she knows that Ivan is the one, and that he didn't stay around. He just said, yeah, that's nice, and left. And Alyosha says, then he despised me, and you too. When he went out laughing, I felt it was nice to be despised. I'm in the middle of 553. The child with fingers cut off is nice, and to be despised is nice. Do you know, Alyosha, do you know I would like ... There's the dots. I mean, what she wants from Ivan, I don't know exactly, but she's the perfect masochist, and she immediately knows that he's the perfect sadist, and she wants him around. So I take that now. Now you can see that I didn't make it up. And you'll see again later, I couldn't find this quote in a hurry, that when Ivan talks to the devil, what he's really interested in is more details about the tortures in hell. Exactly what do they do? There's no question about it. Ivan is sadistic. His pure, lofty attitude is really motivated by the dark side. I mean, collecting these nice children's anecdotes turns out to turn him on. He likes them. And he pretends that he's collecting them, as a refutation against all the evil people. He, Ivan, who's not involved in any of this evil and torture, he's relishing the evil and torture. That's why I think the translation is wrong to say it's a fine collection. It's a nice collection, just the way she says to be despised is nice. That's the word they're going to use. Another more sophisticated way of arguing the same point about Ivan, which Dostoevsky certainly, I think, probably senses, is that Sartre, how many red no eggs did he? Well, okay, you know that for Sartre to be sadistic doesn't mean you have to actually hurt anybody. It means that you want to be the detached bystander who turns them into an object, so that by staring at them, so they can't turn you into an object by staring at you. So there's this sort of battle of gazes, and the sadist wins. What's his name? I forget him. Inez. Oh, it's a woman. Inez is the sadist, and I can't remember the other woman. Anybody remember? Garcin is the guy. Anyway, Sartre's got a whole theory about how, if you're a detached observer, that is a sadistic attitude. And that's why being an eyewitness, way back he's setting up Ivan, and there's a place that I couldn't find. If any of you happen to see it, tell me where. I know that Fyodor says somewhere, Ivan isn't one of us, he's observing us. Maybe I should just try to do the search again. I'll probably find it. The wonders of look inside the books on Amazon. I trust you've discovered this. It's all full of exciting and fun things to do. Okay, so Ivan Stance is an observer, and that's a kind of involvement. That's what's so peculiar. To be a detached observer is to be, at very abstract level, sadistic already. That is, to be turning everybody else into objects to be observed. And in Ivan's case, it's not just abstract. He really has this tendency to observe. Oh, and I forgot that other quote from Lisa. Although I can't resist reading this on 554. Again, none of this is giving away the plot. But this is about as crazy a thing as the cats. And again, you think Dostoevsky is just wild. After that conversation, which I just read, in which she's wondering whether Ivan despises her, and it turns out she hopes he despises her. That would be nice. And then at the end of the whole chapter, as soon as Alyosha had gone, Lisa unbolted the door, opened it a little, put her finger in the crack, and slammed the door with all her might, pinching her finger. Pinching seems an understatement. I'm crushing her finger. 10 seconds later, releasing her fingers, she walked slowly to her chair. She sat up straight in it and looked intensely at her blackened finger and at the blood that oozed out from under the nail. Her lips were quivering, and she kept whispering to herself, I am a wretch, a wretch, a wretch. That's pretty wild. And so, anyway, and that's all just to set up Ivan and bring out the sadistic side of him. And so that's the second argument. So he's involved because he's motivated to make this collection by feeling sorry for himself and his childhood and his father. He's part of the problem because he really enjoys the torturing of the children. He's too clean-cut and to torture anybody himself, or, it turns out, to kill anybody himself. But you've got to realize that he is also responsible for a lot of the evil in the book. The way the plot is so complicated, this isn't giving anything away. But it's a kind of Graham Greene view that if you pretend to be the innocent and think that you're sort of pure and coming in, so to speak, to the city from the outside to clean things up, like in The Third Man, just as Holly Martin turns out to be the cause of all the deaths in The Third Man, Ivan may be the cause of all the deaths in The Brothers. I'm not sure about that. You'll have to look into that. But anyway, he's very, very much responsible. In fact, I found this in reading some notes on the brothers Karamazov that Dostoevsky wrote while he was writing the book. He hasn't got a name for Ivan yet. He calls him sometimes the educated one and sometimes the murderer. Although, as I say, he's much too clean-cut to murder anybody. And that's so complicated that your minds would boggle if I even tried to explain it. But anyway, so he's totally responsible for something very evil. Somebody gets murdered and Ivan is somehow responsible. What's the conclusion? Well, it's not the logic of his view that's wrong then. It's the philosophical detached position which he claims in making this the idea that he is outside all this bad suffering and has a ticket, and he's so clean-cut that he's not going to get involved in it at all. He's going to give back his ticket. Well, now that you've heard the whole case, you can see that that's not at all where he has any right to be standing. He is a participant, not an eyewitness. He's part of the problem, and that's it. Giving back the ticket just isn't an option. And this is sort of spelling out what you said, but spelling it out specifically for Ivan. You'd have to, if anybody else around has a view that they're too good for this world and the world is that they want to get out of it, you'd have to know their past and why how they're involved. But Dostoevsky certainly thinks, and now comes the next part of it, that everybody is involved in and responsible for the evil in the world. Somebody said something like that. I said your argument is coming up later. So who said that you should try to make the world better instead of sitting around complaining about the evil? Somebody somewhere said that. Anyway, that's Zosima's view. Zosima is, in a way, in a kind of brilliant Dostoevsky way, the absolute opposite of Ivan. So opposite of Ivan that he is sort of, I think, equally wrong. But you have to see how it works out. There's something, Zosima never asks the question, how could I possibly forgive all the evil in the world, which is Ivan's view. He says there's no way to forgive it. It's just unforgivable that there should be such a bad world. Zosima, on the other hand, and you've read this already if you've kept keeping up on the reading, he feels guilty for all the evil in the world. That's what I find this fascinating symmetry. That whereas Ivan feels that nothing bad in the world is his fault, he's a clean-cut person, and he gives back his ticket. He isn't as if he's been involved in watching, involved in producing or enjoying this bad play. But Zosima has the, I think, equally crazy view that he's responsible for all the evil, and he gets there in two steps. I don't know how important it is to Dostoevsky. I don't even know if Dostoevsky knows he's doing it, but I think he does. And here's the case for it. But I don't want to get carried away by my peculiar interest in this. I mean, the important thing to keep in mind is, what is Zosima's answer to the evil in the world? That's he's got right, sort of. And then you can make this little quibble at the end. Maybe he's got it a little exaggerated. So let's look at it. So for one thing, he knows that that monks in general shouldn't withdraw from the world. It's as if they don't give back the ticket, but they certainly somehow don't really get involved in the play. They hang around outside somewhere, and that's not good, he says at the top of 164. Because we have come here and shut ourselves within these walls, we are no holier than those outside, but on the contrary, from the very fact of coming here, each of us has confessed to himself that he is worse than others, all men on earth. That's pretty extreme. One tends to read this, I did for years, as if Zosima is such a nice guy and such a holy guy and so perceptive about everybody else's motivations and suffering. We just should believe what he says. But I don't think we're supposed to believe the next part, which comes right after that. And two sentences later, when he realizes that he is not only worse than others, but that he is responsible to all men for all and everything, for all human sins, national and individual, only then can the aim of our seclusion be attained. For know, dear ones, that every one of us is undoubtedly responsible for all men and everything on earth, not merely through the general sinfulness of creation, but each one personally for all mankind and every individual man. I mean, that's just nuts. I mean, you can't really believe it. You can say, isn't that a nice idea? But I'm not going to take responsibility for everything that's going on in Iraq and in Bali and in New York and so forth. Every tortured person, every hungry person. This doesn't seem plausible. And I think in a certain way it follows from their withdrawing. That is, if you get out of the world, the way the monks try to do, you don't have any notion anymore of what evil you are able to fix and what evil you aren't, what evil is relevant and what evil isn't. I mean, if you're living in Berkeley, you can decide to help the homeless or the whatever, and you can have some local particular evil that you feel involved with and want to fix it. But if you withdraw from the world, not as bad as Ivan withdraws, but still withdraw, you can't tell anymore what evil is really your business. And in a certain sense, Zosima sits around feeling responsible for all the evil in the world, but he doesn't do anything about any of it. But he does at least have, and this is what I think Dostoevsky is mainly interested in. I must say I can't help being annoyed at this, but that's not the main point. The main point is that he's got the opposite of Ivan's stance. Instead of sitting around complaining about the evil and saying, who could possibly forgive them, he's saying, I'm responsible, and asking everybody to forgive him. On page 312, he says, if the evil things men do move you to indignation and overwhelming distress, even to a desire for vengeance on the evildoers, shun above all things that feeling. Go at once and seek suffering for yourself, as though you yourself were guilty of that wrong. Accept that suffering and bear it, and your heart will find comfort, and you will understand that you too are guilty, for you might have been a light to the evildoers and were not a light to them. Well, again, I mean, it's the right idea, sort of the antidote to Ivan, but it's pretty far-fetched, and it doesn't really do much good to feel guilty and accept suffering instead of going out and doing something about it. And as somebody said, as I say, the thing one ought to do if they find that there's a lot of evil in the world is go out to fix the evil that they are partially involved with and responsible for. And finally, it's very important that Ivan knows this. It isn't as if I'm cooking this up against Dostoevsky or against Ivan. Let me just make sure where I am. So he doesn't ask how to forgive the bad people and God for the evil in the world. He asks them to forgive him. That's fine. It's the opposite of Ivan. That's fine. He's outside of any particular situation, and that's why he can't do anything or really understand the kind of involvement that he's got. So being a philosopher or being a monk, you either end up denying responsibility for anything if you're a philosopher, or you, in Ivan's way, or you end up taking responsibility for everything if you're a monk in Zosima's way. And I think neither of them are okay, and Zosima knows it. And the evidence that Zosima knows it and thinks that this is not the right way is obvious. You probably remember. Do you remember where it becomes clear that besides Zosima saying we're all guilty who have retreated into the monastery, what does he tell Alyosha to do? Yeah. That's right. He sends away Alyosha from the monastery for good. And I think that's the evidence that there is something wrong with the being in the monastery. The monk position is better than the philosopher's, but it's still not right. And the only way that the world is going to become better, and a lot of the book is how Alyosha actually combats local evil, makes the local stuff better. And in a certain sense, Alyosha is a part of something that makes the whole world better. But he had to leave the monastery to do it. And so this is on page 83, the end of the top paragraph in section 7. He looked intently at Alyosha as though considering something. Then it's a little lower. When it's God's will to call me, leave the monastery, go away for good. Alyosha started. This is not the place for you. I bless you for great service in the world. Yours will be a long pilgrimage, and you will have to take a wife, too. Lisa, for sure. Though how that's going to work out and the way they are existential doubles we haven't seen yet. Alyosha is definitely not a sadist, but there is some deep kinkiness in him which meshes with something in her. It's just too early to talk about it. Yours will be a long pilgrimage, and you will have to take a wife too. You will have to bear all before you come back. Christ be with you. Don't abandon him, and he won't abandon you. You will see great sorrow, and in that sorrow you will be happy. And that's it. So that's the next step. I mean, the next step is to see that you have to go out in the world and combat the evil in the world. And but I have another point here. Sorry, I want to say one more thing about the proof that Dostoevsky knows that Zosima is wrong in taking responsibility for all the evil in the world and suffering for it. If you watch, you'll see that Alyosha, even when he leaves the monastery, doesn't take any responsibility for the crime at the center of the book. He doesn't show any compassion for at least two people, Rakitin and Smerzhikov. In other words, he hasn't got this sort of universal love your neighbor attitude, and he hasn't got certainly he hasn't got the idea that he's responsible, he individually, for every bad thing that happens, even in that little town, the name of which means pigsty, that he's not taking responsibility for that. And that's good, because you want this to be realistic. You don't want it to be at the level of beautiful sort of homilies of the Zosima sort. Okay, now that's the whole point of that. It's time to stop and let people say things. Are you convinced by the story? Convinced by Ivan's objection? Convinced by the way Dostoevsky sets up, show he's wrong? You think I made it up? It took me years to make this case. People used to think I made it up. How could such a nice guy as Ivan be there enjoying the suffering of these children? And Dostoevsky has definitely set it up. Yeah. That's right. That's interesting. No, I don't think he has he doesn't have another chance. It's a good point. I mean, he doesn't I sort of was talking about that when I said he sort of says he loves Katerina, but he doesn't really love her, but she is his existential double, of course. She also is pure and lofty and thinks that she's better than everybody else and so forth. And therefore they've got a lot in common. And I don't know, it's a possible paper topic in there. I mean, I haven't thought about the Katerina side a bit. And it's something that one could think about, and how much it's like Ivan, and how much it plays a role in motivating this, as you're suggesting, this outburst against the world. You certainly have to feel that it's something deep enough that goes clear back to his being a tortured child. But it could be that sort of triggers him thinking again that he's the suffering one. Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
What I don't understand is why I would share like just to make so bad. I wanted him to say something about all the selfless duties.
By Ivan. Good. I think you're putting your finger on a kind of flaw in the book. But let me think about it a bit, and I'll explain what I mean. You're at the next stage of it. The question is sort of, now we want to see, well, how is Alyosha going to react to this story? I told you how Zosima, in effect, reacts by this overplaying of his own guilt and suffering. And now Alyosha's heard this whole story. He knows, this is a very interesting point, Alyosha knows there's something wrong with this story. He knows that he's not going to go out and kill himself at 30, and Ivan shouldn't either. And he knows that he wouldn't build a world like this. And he doesn't think there, and he doesn't himself have the power to forgive these torturers. So what can he do? Well, what he does is pretty precipitous and not very smart. So, and maybe that's fine, because he doesn't, he's the youngest and he didn't go to the university and study philosophy. And but he makes a very bad move at this point. And it's necessary for the plot that he make this bad move. And it's probably okay for him. Let's see. That's what you're asking about. So Ivan says the issue is not who's involved or not involved, but how can we forgive such people who do this? And there's nobody who can forgive them, he says. And they shouldn't be forgiven at all. And then Alyosha gets confused. And he says, in effect, that there is somebody who can forgive them, Jesus. Because Jesus took on himself all the suffering of the world, and having taken on this suffering, he has the right to forgive everybody. Let's see, and it's a confused point, and Alyosha never succeeds in really developing it. Let me tell you where we are. So Zosima thinks you should face your involvement in your guilt and ask everybody else to forgive you. He thinks the question is not who has the right to forgive, but who has the right to blame. And that's a good move to get beyond Ivan. But when Ivan asks, is there anyone who has the right to forgive everybody, Alyosha, just in sort of the converse of Zosima, who asked everybody to forgive him. So Alyosha says, is there somebody who has the right to forgive everybody? And he says, yes, Jesus does it, because he's sinless, and he suffered, and in his suffering, he made up for all the suffering in the world. That's such a crazy argument. On 239 is where it happens. This is right after he said he's pushed into the corner by the argument, and he won't admit that he would create the world. And then he says, no, I can't admit it, says Alyosha suddenly, with flashing eyes. Let's see. He wouldn't admit, having a world like this. He wouldn't consent to it. And then he says, but Ivan, you asked just now, is there a person in the whole world who has the right to forgive and can forgive? But there is a being, and he can forgive everything, all and for all, because he gave his innocent blood for all and everything. You've forgotten him, and on him is built the edifice, And it is him they cry aloud to, "Thou art just, O Lord, for thy ways are revealed." Well, there's lots wrong with that. Mostly what's wrong with it is that Dostoevsky can't make any sense of it. And I'm afraid neither can I. I mean, Dostoevsky manages to take every Christian symbol and interpret it, like the baptism one is the only one you've seen so far, but I gave you that long list. Even the crucifixion is in there as the right way to understand suffering. But the one thing he can't do very well, though he tries, is to explain how one person could suffer for everybody and thereby be completely innocent and yet crucified, and thereby suffering for everybody, somehow free everybody of their guilt and make them and forgive them. It just doesn't work. I mean, you'll see in the book when you get there how it doesn't work, and which one of the three brothers tries to suffer for all of humanity, and how crazy it is, and how and Dostoevsky has no way of demagicalizing what's called this vicarious suffering on the cross, and how it sort of balances the books. He just doesn't know what to do with it. But he gives it to Alyosha, and Alyosha tries it, and it gets trashed by Ivan. That's where we are on 239. So Alyosha makes the move, and makes the wrong move, says, okay, the way to answer this problem is just to bring in Jesus and his innocence and his suffering. And Ivan says, the one without sin and his blood. No, I haven't forgotten him. And what is he going to do? Well, he hasn't forgotten him. He's going to make a whole, what he calls poem, which is, it's not really rhymes. He's going to write a whole kind of play about Jesus and his innocence. And that's the Grand Inquisitor story. So Alyosha I think Alyosha makes this wrong move. You're the one. Who said this? Yeah. I think Alyosha makes this quick wrong move just because Dostoevsky wants to get the Grand Inquisitor story in here. And it's true that it's not clear what right move Alyosha at this stage of his innocence and his youth and so forth, and lack of understanding of the world, could make. Alyosha doesn't really understand what the right way to behave is until he leaves the monastery. But the interesting thing is, Dostoevsky hates the idea of Jesus as the one without sin and his innocent blood. Dostoevsky doesn't have to buy all of Christianity. He's remaking Christianity, just like Kierkegaard, in their own, according to their own understanding, their own existential phenomenology. And he thinks that if Jesus was completely innocent, he wouldn't be able to help anybody. And he would cause a whole lot of trouble. The trouble is in the Grand Inquisitor story, and we're not ready for that. But I just want to fill you in on other books of Dostoevsky's. And there's The Idiot, mainly. Anybody read The Idiot? Very few people, it seems to me, understand The Idiot. But I think there's some notes of Dostoevsky's where he says somewhere, in some notebook or something, that in The Idiot he's trying to combine Jesus and Don Quixote, which is meaning a crazy person trying to do good. See, The Idiot is so pure, so innocent in that book, that he tells people the truth even when it breaks them. He tells people who want him to love them, I forget the woman's name, that he doesn't love her, because he's just honest. He's absolutely ruthlessly honest, and by the end of the book, everybody's life has been destroyed. It's not as if it's not about how if Jesus came back, the bad world would destroy everybody. It would destroy him. That's how people read the book. I think that can't be right. It's that if there was such a pure, innocent person with the power of God to do things to people, and he would be destructive. And that's part of what I think. Another thing that is not just me, it's clear that Dostoevsky thinks that in order to really help people, you've got to have experienced the dark side and have evil in your past, which you integrated and overcome, but which you understand because it's still part of you. I mean, that's what The Idiot doesn't have. And notice, how about Zosima? Was he a nice boy? Remember? What did he do? What was his job? He was an army officer. And how did he treat his orderly? Remember? He slapped him so hard that he bled. He was brutal and ruthless guy before he became transformed in ways, for reasons and in ways we have to talk about later, into the Zosima we know. But it's very important that he had this brutal past. And then, yeah. I don't think I understand your question yet. Are you asking about how Zosima bowed down to Dmitri and said he bowed down to the suffering in store for him? Ah, I see. Yes, that's right. Dmitri says he's a bug, and he doesn't sort of hit people, but he's particularly nasty to women. Yes, Dmitri also has to have a bad past and get over it, but he's not going to come out of it a sort of saintly person, but at least a very good person. And bowing down to the suffering in store for him, we have to wait and talk about later. But there's one more, the possessed. How many read the possessed? Anybody? There is Father Tihon. He takes the place of Zosima. He is the wise, good person who understands the human heart and who's loving and so forth. So you don't know what Tihon was before that. He was an alcoholic. It's just absolutely central to Dostoevsky that if you don't partake in the dark side of being a human being, you can't be a saving, compassionate person. You can pretend to be like Katerina or Ivan, but you can't really, and you can't even if you're totally innocent, like the idiot. You're not able to understand and help people if you're like that. So that's why he jumps on. Dostoevsky gangs up with Ivan, so to speak, at this point, against Alyosha, and is going to attack the view of Jesus as the completely innocent, the one without sin. That's the crucial phrase. There isn't any one without sin. I mean, the Catholic Church goes to a whole lot of trouble to make Jesus have a mother born. He's born without sin from Mary, who's born without sin from her mother. That's the Immaculate Conception leading to the virgin birth, all to keep this, do just what Dostoevsky does not want to do, to de-animalize and dark and earthy eyes Jesus. So now we're ready to read. We still have a little time. We're ready to start looking at the Grand Inquisitor story, because there you get a picture of Jesus as Ivan understands him, which is as the one who's completely innocent and without sin. Because I remember now, the Grand Inquisitor story is told by Ivan to Alyosha to refute the idea that if there were a Jesus-like person without sin, he would make a mess of the world. If, by the way, if you don't realize that, you think that Jesus is the hero of the Grand Inquisitor story. How many have read the Grand Inquisitor story already? How many have read it outside of the Brothers Karamazov in some other course somewhere, just as a little pamphlet? You can do that. You, okay. And you too. When you did, in a course, I presume, was it clear that who seemed to be the winner, so to speak, the right guy, the Grand Inquisitor or Jesus? Your course. Jesus, you see? Bad news. That's what happens when you take it out of the book. In your course too? Isn't that amazing? Well, keep your eyes open. It's not like that. And when you see that it's being told by Ivan to destroy the picture of Jesus as this perfect person, you won't fall for that unless you're really stupid. And I'm going to read you something from somebody who was obviously really stupid, and that's a guy named Berdayev, who people consider one of the best interpreters of Dostoevsky. After all, he's a Russian existentialist. I think he even knew Dostoevsky. And when he writes about the Grand Inquisitor, he says The legend of the Grand Inquisitor contains the best of the constructive part of Dostoevsky's religious ideas. It's noteworthy that the extremely powerful vindication of Christ, which is what the legend is, should be put in the mouth of the atheist Ivan Karamazov. Well, that's just mind-boggling in its stupidity, because if you get the conclusion that there is an atheist in there defending Jesus, you should wonder whether maybe you've made a mistake somewhere in your reasoning, and not just say, "Isn't that interesting?" That it's not a vindication. You will look for it on your own and see what good he does the world. But we better sort of back up. We still have 5 minutes to set it up so that you can read it carefully. Because you would be off on a little bit of a wrong track if you just thought that Jesus was the bad guy. So let's look at the structure of the argument. What the Grand Inquisitor story really is an antinomy. I can write that on the board. It's a philosophical kind of argument, which I'll explain how it works in a minute, and it's on the diagram that you've got. So, see how to spell it. And isn't that right? Yeah. In an antinomy, you get two opposite views which are presented as the only possible alternatives. And then you show each side argues for its truth by showing that the other side is hopeless, can't be right. So in Kant, whom I mention every once in a while, did I ever write on the board? I probably did at some point. You say Kant has a whole section of the Critique of Pure Reason called the antinomies, and he gives 4 of them, but I just give you one for an example. So if you think that the only 2 alternatives about space are that space goes on forever, or else it's finite, you discover that neither view is tolerable, and you show you can if you think space goes on forever, then the other side can point out that that's impossible. That would be something like an actual infinite, but infinite isn't a sort of big number. There can't be an actual infinite, so there must be a limit to space. And the other side says, okay, but then so then the other side comes back and says, yeah, but what would there be on the other side of this limit? I used to worry about that. It was about 10, I think. That you come to the edge of space and then you look to see if there's anything on the other side, and it looks like there's more space out there. So, and Kant thinks there's a third position. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You could take the Kant course later if you want to find out. But the whole, and you get the same thing with time. Is there a beginning of time? Well, if there isn't, time has been going on forever, but forever is too big for anything ever to be. So it must have started somewhere. But then when? And when in time? And how did it get started? And that doesn't make any sense either. So antinomies are positions which each side argues against the other side by showing that the other side is untenable, so they must be right. And the only way to fix an antinomy is to find that there's a third possibility that hasn't been considered. Now, let's just look at the antinomy as it's set up in the Grand Inquisitor story. And so you'll know who the players are just in time before time is up. It's interesting and important that the Grand Inquisitor story begins with talking about the fact that I didn't mark it because I didn't know I was going to get quite this far. But it talks about a great heresy that happens in the 15th century. What is that? You know? Yeah. The Protestant Reformation. That's Luther. And there is, of course, the Grand Inquisitor. And what is he? I mean, what religion is he? He's the Roman Catholic Church, the Grand Inquisitor. And what's going on is, in this antinomy, is the Roman Catholic Church versus the Lutheran view. And of course, the Grand Inquisitor is on the side of the Roman Catholic Church. It turns out that Jesus is giving a very Kierkegaardian argument. I'm going to, in fact, read you bits of Kierkegaard at certain points because it's so much. Dostoevsky, like such a genius, sort of invented Kierkegaard almost verbatim in some of what the Grand Inquisitor says Jesus says. Remember, when you read it, you will remember, if you have already, Jesus doesn't say anything, but the Grand Inquisitor attributes a view to Jesus, which Dostoevsky attributes to the Protestants. And the Grand Inquisitor defends a view which Dostoevsky is attributing to the Roman Catholics. Now, don't get hung up, I got one more minute, worrying about whether that's fair. He's not fair to either the Protestants or the Catholics. He's doing something else. He's extrapolating their view to the absolute logical limit, as he takes it, and trying to show how each one of them, if they're the only alternatives, would show that you've got to take the other one. That's the antinomy. And I won't tell you, but you try to figure out by next time, what's the third position that will solve the antinomy? We'll find out next time.